Okay. Are you ready? All right, she's ready. Is everybody in here? Okay, everybody. This is Joe.
In the orange.
Are you ready? Okay. Where's Joe?
Joe's right there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Joe, you ready? Everybody seated? Okay, hit it. Super loud, Joe, super loud.
These paintings are experimental, and I would mostly like feedback on exactly what parts you do and do not like about them, so I can possibly correct some errors in my method, as well as harness potentially successful aspects of them for my next major project. I'm trying to develop a method that appeals to spontaneity, mimicry, tactility, color harmony, and mood. I feel that environment is one thing that I'm going to have to try and focus on most in my next projects, especially considering how it's one of the things I understand the very least of all. I wonder if you can find any aspect of these paintings aesthetically interesting.
What way interesting?
Aesthetically? In order to have something in my mind for the next project, these paintings functioning as trials, formulating what I might do for the next project methodologically.
So do you see each one as kind of a possible prototype for a series, or there's a development from one group to the next, or what?
I'd say all of them are sort of prototypes for the formulation of a method which could produce a series, or at least using that method as sort of the form of the painting. I'm focusing on the form right now as opposed to the content, at least to a degree where that's where my mind was when I was creating these paintings.
I don't actually think that's a distinction, but
I guess I'm trying to use sort of lingo from the program that has lately been brought up. I'm more talking about method as opposed to meaning.
you don't think that's the same thing?
I was about to say.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Method and meaning, sort of arbitrarily separated, and we try to do that, but that doesn't really work. In fact, the preponderance of what we've been saying in this fix, at least since I've been here, is precisely how method and meaning are inextricably linked, and how what you do with your hand actually leads to us being able to gather meaning from what you've done with your hand.
That's cool. We don't have to get hung up on it. I do want to ask a little clarification thing, which was in your sentence, in your statement, you said, I just found out we're Mercury retrograde.
Yes.
That's why I'm struggling right now. I just found out. Okay. So I'm going to ask a clarification, which is, in your statement you said that you want to decide, you want to see what people like, to decide what direction to go through because you're planning a really big series. Is that
More like trying to see what would appeal to the sensibilities of the program in order to make another piece that could possibly open the door to that. There's going to be one more piece that I'm working on next.
But who cares about the sensibility of the program? You do. Why? What does that mean to you?
Well, it's more about growth, because I was doing art for a long while, and now I want to make a big change, whether that means anything or not, just to sort of.
What was your art like before? It was like the first.
It's also changed quite a bit. Yeah. Like when I walked into the room, I felt like I was in a gallery where like it's like a display of works by different artists. Like somebody curated them in a way that they thought that this was something that they wanted to display together. And until I saw the last one, I was like, okay, now it is Joe's script. Like that's when I realized it's Joe's script.
Well, that's good.
So your work used to be kind of more like these allegorical or like mythological or symbolic tableaus painted in this way with the kind of looping, wet brushstrokes.
Yeah, well, not exactly. You know, I was working, this is more about things before I even got here. And I've been trying to change just to grow since I got here. So there's no real representation of.
This is similar to the ones you
Yeah,
gave. It's
it's
not exactly the same.
Yeah.
I agree that it's similar.
I will say, like, a lot of what I feel like has been criticism in his last scripts, he has, like, in my opinion, really listened and, like, implemented a lot of it in this one. So I feel like I remember constantly, like, it's just, people were saying, like, there's nowhere to enter, maybe, like, that, because there was, like, always a lot of these different ideas. And this one, to me, I feel like you really honed in to, like, this specific character that you're thinking of, which, like, is...
Which one on the right?
Yeah, I'm talking about the one with, like, I think they're, like, skeletons, but... or they're painted in the color of skeletons, but they're like muscles.
A muscle.
Anyways, that's relevant. But I do think that, like, also the fact that everything was super, super saturated before, it's easier for me personally to digest this one. Maybe because, like, the saturation is super, like, focused on where you want us to focus, which is the character. And then you have the story.
Could you, just because I'm trying to understand what you're saying, and I actually think you're trying to open a door, could you kind of like just indicate the place where you're like, oh, I see something in there that really feels like it's addressing a previous conversation?
So I felt like before, which I genuinely liked before, but I do think like you're getting the story maybe across more clearly now, is because there was always like very high saturation of every color going on in a lot of what's happening, and now I feel like the high saturation is like based on the storyline of like you've honed it down to just these characters and then maybe a little bit of background context. I'm almost reading it like these characters are having like this story going on, but it's like this is the main idea. And then you have like the high contrast is happening in the storyline. It's do.
Ah, okay.
And so I feel like now I'm able to like move across the scene in a more seamless way rather than kind of like seeing everything all at once, if that makes sense to you.
It slows you down a little bit.
Yeah, I'm able to like be guided rather than like it everywhere.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Yes.
I'm a little confused, and I don't know if I'm the only one by sort of what projects we're undertaking here in this 45 minutes. And part of that is I think the framing of what you said, and part of it is just the sort of I think Trey, when you said it feels like completely different things that are sort of like put on the wall together. And maybe this metaphor is bad, but it's sort of like helping me figure out what I'm trying to do here. It's like you're telling us, you're going to bake us something. You're going to bake us, we don't even know if they're cookies or cake or something, and you're like, okay, here's the raw ingredients for this thing that I'm gonna make you, and I really hope you like it in the end. Well, we don't know what that thing is yet. So it's like we can talk to you about what we feel about lemon flavor or coconut or chocolate chip, and it's like maybe by us doing that, you learn something about lemon that you didn't know before, and you're like, I really like lemon. Like, I'm gonna use lemon in this thing. But we're not really helping you build to kind of something beyond that. So I'm confused about whether that's what we're supposed to be doing here, or if we're supposed to be talking about the work that's kind of most like the stuff we've seen before, because we just don't know how to enter these ones.
I think talking to you and knowing you a little bit, it makes me really question of why you don't really be more specific, since we do statements before we present during critique. Like, because I know you really dive in and research each element, especially with the ones that are similar to your bodies of work you have shown us, especially with the blue one. I've seen you researching exhaustively with the specific trees, specific ways those branches are, and every element, you know what those are, and I'm just really curious why you're not really blunt about the story of it, or like why these are important to you, because they're clearly really well rendered, and repetitively you do the same thing. So I'm just personally really curious, because I honestly just I can read it in a certain way, but I really think you have something to tell us, but you're not putting those in words, which is something I'm really curious about.
I think there's a different door to be opened here. I think that, like Isaac, you're saying that you know Joe really well, and you know that there's all these reasons, but I don't actually believe that Joe knows that why he's interested in those things. There's a different interest in aesthetic. There's an aesthetic interest in something, and there's a deeper interest in something that I don't think you personally, Joe, have gotten to the space of what you know you're personally interested in deep diving into. Like right now, we're seeing all this stuff on the wall. This is like asking a question to us of like, which of these styles is the best style for me to jump into? Mm-hmm. And I think that's not really a question that you need to be asking us. That's a question that you need to be asking yourself of like, what are you most interested in? You have the ability to do all these styles. Like, there's a lot of cool shit happening in all of these, but like that's a thing for you to figure out. Like, and I think even in the previous works that you presented to us, I don't think the criticisms have ever been about like these aren't humorous or these aren't cool to look at. But I think that there's more to digest in like the you know, I hate to keep saying this, but like the position of what it is that you want to say with using those terms. Like when you use these aesthetic terms or these aesthetic languages, what are you saying with them? What is your position on them? And I think that's kind of where I think you're getting a little bit confused about like style and meaning or content and form, where they kind of exist together, but you have to do the work to find those meanings for yourself.
I just want to agree. You go.
I agree with that. Because these on this side are really cool, but I don't translate them at all into the ways that you have previously been working and engaging color. I think that this one that is kind of green and red, I can see a differentiation in your brush strokes in this blue one that's really interesting to me. I guess my question to you would be like, there's that throw the baby out with the bathwater, like why completely distance from what you were doing before, which had really quality moments to it that are very specific to you, versus making the adjustments within that, like it. And I wonder too what you mean about getting better in the program, because like you are better in this one. Whether it works perfectly or not, there's a difference in the approach to this one. So the exploration is already there. I don't feel like you have to force exploration into this like whole different zone that doesn't really seem like it's in conversation with the way that you've previously been painting or the images that you've shown us. And I'm curious, because you and I have had some conversations before around the consistency of your pieces being related to masculinity and violence and those type of things, and kind of the discomfort that that makes you feel, because that's not necessarily what you were portraying. But then this piece, it seems like you leaned into that, which is interesting. And so I think that, and this might not be like critique per se, but like, don't throw it all the way away to try to find it to find it again. Like, jump into it to find where else it goes, if that makes sense.
I agree with what Zika said. I just want to say something really quickly, just because I feel like Stephen says this a lot. I think it's really important, it's worth reiterating, that, and this is just maybe a technical thing, but you started your statement by saying, I'd like to know what you like and what you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that is Stephen has said at least 50 times, do not describe something in terms of what you like and what you don't like. And the reason being that it does not give you the criteria by which you're judging something. So you're not making a blank judgment, you're seeking criteria with which to make the judgments with. Aesthetics, and you brought up this word, aesthetics, when we describe something as ugly, as beautiful, as cute, as interesting, as zany, as a gimmick, I'm using all of CNI's aesthetic categories, we are making judgments. It's not that it is universally beautiful, it's that I have learned to call that thing beautiful. It's a judgment of it, it's an aesthetic judgment. It actually says more about me than it does about the thing. What does a bird see of the sunset? It's not essentially beautiful, it's culturally beautiful, it's a judgment of the thing. And so liking something versus not liking something doesn't give you the criteria with which to approach the thing in a meaningful way. And so what we're sort of encouraging you to do is to try to interrogate the things that you've already been doing, as Zidika so eloquently said, in order to determine what are the criteria which make this thing a worthwhile project for myself. I wouldn't even call it good. Like, worthwhile meaning that you, after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years of having invested your time in it, can come away with that thing. Like Stephen was telling me a story about a jazz guitarist who plays at a hamburger joint somewhere, it's like he's not getting paid that much for it. And so maybe money is a criteria for something. Seth gave that lecture about is the painting successful? Well, it's like, okay, success maybe is a criteria, but maybe what makes a painting beautiful is a different criteria. So it's up to you to figure out what is the criteria, and good and bad just doesn't give you any.
I think we did such a beautiful team effort on opening the crit, but I kind of want to pivot to talking about some of the paintings, because when I, just to give you one's first impressions, immediate impression before you even think, is always useful. It's not a conclusion, it's not even really a judgment, it's just information. And when I walked by and I saw that painting, I was like, that's a cool painting. I'm excited to see what that person's doing. And the only other painting on this wall that I have that feeling with is the red and the green one. And the thing is, it's actually so related to this painting in terms of how you try to build the image out of these color relationships. And what's really weird about this is that, okay, so now we're going to do the kind of color theory moment where it's we know that red and green are complements. And that means that when they go together, they kind of do a little special buzz in your eye. They intensify each other by their proximity. And so you have this form made out of a bright red, a kind of dark green, but you've added an intermediary color, which is a kind of maroon color, like a almost brown, but still purple, like a dark purplish red, to make this description. And from a certain distance, this looks kind of photographic to me. It, like, the way that it models, so you take something that would be like a black and white photograph, and then you transpose it into a red-green color structure, so that the colors are doing this magical thing that colors do, while they're also creating an illusion of form, and form that's really alive. That's intensified by the nature of the form that it's describing, which sort of looks like a fossil, or maybe like an organic curled, like fiddlehead fern, or more likely a carved element on the side of like a Gothic church or Romanesque church that is based on like a carving interpreting a motif from a plant or an ant or some organic shape. But it isn't really like a description of a plant, but it's almost like a description of a carving of a plant that feels photographic, but it's a painting. And so there's like really weird, interesting stuff that's going on here that when you like really thought about, you could make this image in a number of different ways, but this particular color way of realizing it with the strokes like that created something really kind of special feeling. Now, to move over from that to the blue one, you kind of are setting up a similar color structure within the blue, where you go from a very, very dark, like your dark in the painting might be black, but actually it also might be a very dark blue that functions like a black. And then it goes up with this very saturated kind of electric blue as the middle ground of the color world. And then from that, it goes up into a very, very bright, pale blue, which is basically the white. And the way that you intensify, it's a big value jump between the darkest part and the lightest part. And the way that you modulated those between it in this consistent world, which is this blue world, makes an impression at times it's as though they're glowing, almost like they might be silver. And it's like a very special kind of weird blue light that's like moving through the thing. And then the way that this gets an added punch is there's two places where there is a different hue, which is this warm, tawny color, grayish, bronzish color, which is used on the hair of the two guys, and then in a more muted sense as this kind of planking that
We can't see what they're talking about.
Am
I in the way? Yeah.
Can you just
but
move
like,
to one side?
Or like, maybe because I'm
So-
put it in the corner.
So it's all blue, or do we move it into the middle of the room?
I see.
I see. Sorry.
Joe, is it okay if we move it or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, would someone help with that? Maybe we put it next to this guy.
Yeah, try not, it might be, so the ones on the right are.
Why take that down?
Do that one.
Do you need
Gotta take something
you need
down.
gloves?
Does that take some?
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Sweat.
No.
You got that hand. Yeah.
So,
Careful, it's still wet.
Oh my God.
Are you gonna put that one up there? You're gonna leave it there.
Oh, that's crazy.
No, it was Jared that was using it.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was just.
Like, we're not gonna put it on the floor.
do the screws
Is this
into
the
how
right
it's gonna fall.
orientation? Or like
Let's not break this.
That's it. It's good.
You think it's okay?
Yeah.
All right, so we've got all this color stuff. Are we gonna do a live action thing? Are we gonna do the touching? So you've got this kind of hair color, and then you have the darker version of that color, which creates this planking backdrop that's creating this weird spatial divide in the background, which intensifies your awareness in the effect of the blue light, because it has a warm, even though that's a quite dampened color, it still functions as a kind of warmth in the picture. So like there's like, and then the way that you're describing the different stuff with these shiny, luscious brushstrokes of the circles and the lapping, like there's something going on here that feels to me like an idea or a point of view about how to make a painting out of color and brushstrokes or whatever that I just don't really see in the other things.
Let me,
Please.
I want to try to synthesize what Zdeněk said with what I see as happening in these smaller ones. I think you can do both. You can not throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can continue to play around with the vocabulary of the blue painting. But it's also useful to do experiments with just something, especially after you've worked in this kind of reified style for a long time. So that's all good. I think that's all good. The problem arises with the choose one from the left column and one from the right column aspect of it. The menu. It's like if you walk into a restaurant that's going to cost you $300 and say to the chef, "What's on the menu?" And they say, "I don't know. What are you interested in?" I mean, you expect more from the artist. You, as everyone has said, I'm just reinforcing it. That is up to you. No one else can make that decision for you ever. You have to. It has to be a question of feeling. Because you're not making goods for sale to work. That is essentially not what artists do. They make work that they want to see and then hope to God somebody else finds it interesting. That's a very different position from making a product that looks, that you think the audience wants. So the problem for me is not that you're doing the experiments, it's that you haven't developed any of those experiments. Along the line, somebody was saying this before, that, I can see relationships between the kind of hallucinogenic, mystical aspect of this and the hallucinogenic aspect of that and the hallucinogenic aspect of that and where's the other one? Oh yeah. and this one, but they're really different approaches to that, all three of them. So there's not enough for us to base a judgment on. So even if it were a good idea for us to pick from the menu and tell you which one we thought was cool, which it isn't, it's impossible from that amount of evidence of what your train of thought about it is. It's just too isolated an example. So I think you should keep with the experiments, but I think you have to decide which ones of these you decide which one is important and follow up on that. And then we'll see. Meanwhile, you can continue allowing, if you can allow that idea of your painting to get a little more porous, open to other things, so that every aspect, when you use the word method, a red flag went up for me. Because I think that's actually not what an artist wants. You don't want a method. You want the technique should be a reflection of the meaning of the thing. The technique evolves from the whole meaning construct that the painting makes. You don't have the certain, it's not the other way around, It's not like you're building a lawnmower. So, clearly, because you work so hard at it, that kind of imagery means something to you. I mean, it takes a lot of concentration to make a painting like that. And I don't think you should give that up either, but I do think that whatever it takes for you to start to see that project from different angles, that's what's important.
But doesn't it seem like that's happening in the red and green?
Yes, it does.
I mean, another way of just, because sometimes we have to hear things a number of times or in a different way, but another way of saying what Stephen says, which I think a lot in my actual life, where I'm talking to artists in the world, and I'm just like, nobody's making you make a painting, man. You know what I mean? Ain't nobody putting a gun in the back of your head and saying, you better figure out how to make a painting. It's just like you want to do it. You're the one saying you want to make the painting. And thus, that's up to you, what it is.
And you want to make a painting because you want to see it.
Yeah.
The only way you can see that thing is if you make it exactly like you want it, And so that's what's the driving force, I mean, that's at least, I know, just for me personally, that's what gives me a bang when I make a painting. It's like I get the thing up there and I'm like, oh, wow, look at that, It doesn't exist anywhere else like that.
And I do get that sense from the big one. I get why you would want, one would one might want to imagine this image and realize it. Because it's like really funny and like intense and kind of like metal. Like I just have like a metal soundtrack in my head.
That's
Like,
absolutely
which like I'm into. I like the idea of the glowing. My favorite part is like the little glowing vignettes at the top, with like the guys that are all in like the same relationship between the two bodies, like the mirrored identical bodies with like the different kinds of mask faces, and they're all like entangled in this like different kind of conflict, but they also might be embracing each other. And then like the skeletons, I'm like a huge fan of painted skeletons. I think they're one of the best ideas because just because they're
Well,
so
note that
funny.
Jared is a huge fan of painted skeletons, so
Yeah.
next time, you know. we're gonna-
Yeah, I better see a whole series. No, I think that like there's such a funny concept in a painting because it's something that can really only exist as a painting. That's like a pure imagination. It's not an observed thing. It's like a structure that you animate in your mind through the flesh of paint, which is why when James Ensor, for instance, has the paintings with the skeletons doing stuff like fighting over a fish, or there's a Klinger painting of like a skeleton taking a piss outside in a pond. Like, wow. I saw that painting and I was like, well, a penis, okay, let's see things that skeletons don't need to do. Take a pee. And he's like holding his like little skeleton hands like he has a penis, but obviously skeletons don't. But then you're like, and whenever you're like, yeah, he doesn't even have a skeleton bladder, then you're like, also, they don't stand up either. You know what I mean? Like, it's all, but that's kind of the mark of the fantasy, like the fiction of painting, where it's like, well, there's no reason that that can't exist in a
Plus,
painting.
he's in a kind of romantic landscape.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I mean, another place where skeletons don't take a piss.
And so it's just like, but like once you get to the question where you're like, that's not what a skeleton would be doing, you've already invested in the fiction of the painting as containing a kind of plausible reality for yourself as you have entered it in your mind. And like, so yeah, I just think I kind of get to places like that around this painting. And then you know, without even having to go into the guys in the front, where you then start thinking like, what's the relationship between them? And so it's like, is this some archetypal meeting of a divided self, or of like self and other, and they like look exactly the same, but they're like doing different stuff, and like one of them has like a little penis, and the other one has like a gun that's bigger than the penis, and one of them's holding something that kind of is like a stick, or maybe like a scroll that's also kind of like doing a thing. So it's just like, it's all about like a kind of authority, but like they're smiling, and there's like, okay, is this them having reverberated through different time and like iterations of like dimensions of this kind of meeting between self and self, or self and other? And so I just am like, wow, you know what, there's a lot going on that's like worth imagining. Like I would not necessarily have thought about this in exactly this way if I hadn't ever seen this painting. And like that's a cool terrain within which to to progress your imagery.
One other simple thing that I see in all of them, and I think this, you know, I'm talking looking at it from different angles, Joe. Like this is, you need a kind of point of entry into something that might is an assumption that you don't realize. You always use the paint in the same way throughout a given painting. I mean, you don't always use the paint the same way in every painting, but within that painting, you use the paint exactly the same way over the whole painting. Just, you know, think about it.
I don't get what you mean by that.
Hmm?
I don't get what you mean.
This painting is all painted with strokes like this.
I mean, do you see these?
Everything is made like that, you know?
Stephen, do you see in these paintings an attempt for him to try and
Yes.
imagine other ways of
Yeah.
making a mark or use the painting, and that's the way we should regard them?
Yes, exactly. Same thing here, right? This, it's all like filled in like paint by numbers. This one is like glue, glue, glue. I like this painting. I mean, I think it's kind of cool, but I'm just not in the way it's painted, right? But it's consistent all over each one of them.
Yeah, I think that's something I was going to, like 3 statements ago that you said, Stephen, that I was going to do with that. In all these paintings, I think there's something to investigate. I think you can't like get to a language without like really investigating like 100 things and like seeing what sticks for you. And I don't know, I think that's kind of just from your introduction, I think that's really just the place that you're at where you're questioning what you've done up to this point, based off of, I guess, the conversations in the program, I want to assume. But then like, you reach this point where you're just like showing us all this stuff. And I think that you have to continue to just show yourself all these processes and different ways to get to it. And I think eventually, like all of those, like whatever it is that sticks out to you will kind of show up in the work. And once you like kind of figure that out, I don't know.
If you get bored or, with a certain kind of painting, then move on, you know what I mean? But try it until you get bored with it or you don't, it's no longer satisfying. And then suddenly you hit something that you don't get bored with.
Yeah, I think you should definitely stick to your world, Joe. I find it very interesting. And I feel like there's something that happens sometimes with art school when you come into a space with your own like specific world or bubble that you're living in, and we're being taught to think about audience and not like the work, creating work as if it's personal work for ourselves that we want to share with our friends and family members, but like thinking about the audience more. And so sometimes it's like, okay, you're trying to please your professors or you're showing this work to your peers, but I feel like psychologically there's something there as the reason why you're letting go of your ideas. Like, I don't know, but I feel like there's more there as to like why you didn't continue digging deeper into this world that you're like creating.
Well, if you're not willing to let go of the edges to some extent, at least to loosen your grip on them, why are you here? Why not just make paintings?
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing you using these techniques with your world, meshing together to be one and harmonious.
Yeah.
I would consider, if you're gonna experiment during the winter break, something like you want to do things that involve chance, because you'll never know what you're gonna get, and it's always a little surprise for yourself. And you could even apply it to your work.
Also, I just want to bring up one thing that you said in your statement, which is you were talking about that you wanted to let go of content for form. But I would suggest that what you have is a content problem, not a form problem. And meaning that, like, this goes back to another critique, I don't know which one, which is like, actually, I think what needs to be kind of worked out is your relationship to the, I guess to the subject, what we would call the subject. I agree with what Jarrett said about the doubles. Maybe you could read like some Dostoevsky, the double, or there's this new book, Doppelganger. I don't know. The Doppelganger actually has a lot of references to the literature of doubles, which might be interesting. But you have these sort of meeting of like men in these things, which are not homoerotic. They're like the same person. I mean, there's something I think psychologically in that painting that isn't really like in terms of content or why they're meeting or what the storyline is or what the subject of that painting is, what the narrative is, like what is the meaning of the story, what is the subject of the story. That is a content problem, not a form problem. And I think that once you have that more figured out, then you can kind of be like, well, in order to really get the subject to really work, maybe I need to 3D print these things. I mean, who knows what it is? Like, who knows what form? I mean, you can work at it from either way. I think sometimes just experimenting freely can help you sort of understand what your subject is. But for you, I think finding another style is not going to help figure out what the subject of your paintings is.
I mean, have people talked to you about those Carol Dunham wrestling paintings? Have you looked at them?
Which page?
Carol Dunham,
Which one's that?
the wrestlers,
Oh, the wrestlers.
the dudes wrestling each other, like the things he's making now.
Yeah, that's really good.
The other thing is, which is, I mean, like, I don't know if you've like spent a lot of time looking at Gustave Moreau, but like that kind of central figure, really, the one with the spinning faces and all the arms, really kind of. And the one thing that's cool about Moreau is that he experimented a lot formally with texture and kind of pattern of like layering the paint and like kind of pulling little faces and stuff out of them, and they're kind of really rough in places and overly refined in others. But he was a symbolist painter that I really like. I don't know, I feel like maybe a different way of thinking of the content question, because like I don't know that painting doesn't know what it's about. I mean, I think it seems pretty clear what it's about, and like I think that the reason why one might look at Carol Dunham is that that's a group of paintings whose entire discourse has been about like he is an ostensibly heterosexual, like middle-aged white guy who started making these paintings of like burly dudes like rolling all over each other that are also kind of about abstraction. And I think the way like he tries to talk about them really is about like dealing with like masculinity and like whiteness in like particular ways. And I think that that's a kind of content that is not often, like the language to talk about is not often demanded in the same way that especially like artists of color or like black women artists are like kind of expected to clarify certain terms about what they're doing in a way that I'm just like, I kind of think there's a content here that's about like, maybe it's like an adolescent male fantasy or something that might be, maybe when someone said like the retreat from the content is not because it's like you don't know what it is, but you're just like, do I really want to like go into this territory? And I think it's like, I don't know, why not? This is the place to figure out what you're really trying to say.
A couple of other quick artist references, because there's kind of a small coterie of artists in New York that deal with this kind of hallucinogenic, mystical conflation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you guys will think of something I can't think of, but Carol Dunham started off doing abstract paintings on plywood that also had that same thing, him being straight male, white male, but they were like assholes and penises, in the plywood. And then this gradually turned into a more kind of representational vocabulary over the years. But I'm thinking about people like Steve DiBenedetto and James Sienna. I'm not giving you things that you're supposed to look at and think, oh, that looks like my paintings. I mean, they're just without a certain conversation that you may or may not find relevant. But in deciding whether you do or not, I think you learn something. But can you think who's the guy who does the pills, the assemblage things? Like Cohen.
Yeah, his name is
He makes collages out
I know
of
exactly what you mean.
pills, like actual pills.
His name is
Anyway, it doesn't matter. We can move on.
Another artist that comes to mind is Ashley Bickerton.
Oh yeah.
And then just I'll put Ease Against Skin, because especially Ease Against Skin's awesome collages, the photo things that are stuck to the jukeboxes.
What about Inga Essenheim?
Yeah.
Oh, she does the fantasy stuff.
And wait, the woman who shows with Mary Boone that does the extremely deft figure paintings with like thousands of figures in them. Sometimes they're like sailors.
Oh, she just had a huge show and it got a huge write-up, but she shows now PPOW. That's Hillary Harkness.
Hillary
Is that show
Harkness.
closed?
That's right.
I think it is.
Yeah, I think you should definitely check out Hillary Harkness.
I think I just missed it last week.
Yeah.
Hillary Harkness. Yeah, she that like Jerry Saltz was like going on about being one of the best shows of the year.
There's also the last one from here is Heidi Hahn.
Heidi Hahn.
H-A-H-N.
I kind of like the way that the two figures at the bottom seem like an anatomy, like musculature that doesn't have a skin on it. I feel like that's like a part of the content for me. Whereas the guys up at the top, they look more like carvings. But the guys down there, yeah, they just feel like it's like when you see a medical illustration of people without skin. And I think there's something about that that also is kind of about vulnerability in a way. Like they're meeting, the fingers are touching. It's almost like the creation of Adam in the Michelangelo. It's like the fingers are going out to touch. And it's also a little bit like pull my finger. Like they have this like dumb face storyline that's almost like a doll or like more like a puppet or something.
Okay,